War is usually remembered by giant battleships, roaring aircraft carriers, and massive armies colliding across oceans and continents. History glorifies size, power, and overwhelming force. But sometimes war is rewritten by something small, something fast, something so unexpected that the enemy gives it a name born from fear. In the dark waters of the Pacific during World War II, Japanese sailors began whispering about mysterious attackers. They struck at night. They came without warning. They vanished before retaliation was possible. They were not destroyers. They were not submarines. They were tiny wooden boats barely visible on radar, carrying torpedoes powerful enough to sink warships. The Japanese called them devil boats. These boats were officially known as PT. Boats, patrol torpedo boats of the United States Navy. Cheap, fast, lightly armored, and operated by young, fearless crews. These vessels were never meant to dominate the seas. Yet somehow, they became one of the most terrifying weapons Japan faced in the Pacific War. This is the story of how a small American boat turned into a nightmare for an empire. This is the devil boats. When the United States entered World War II, it was unprepared for the vast naval war that Japan had already mastered. The Imperial Japanese Navy dominated the Pacific with battleships, cruisers, and carrier groups. The U.S. needed something different, something fast, flexible, and cheap. That answer came in the form of the PT boat. At first glance, the PT boat looked unimpressive. Most were only 80 feet long, made of wood, not steel. They had almost no armor. A single shell could rip them apart. On paper, they seemed like suicide machines. But what they lacked in protection, they made up for in speed. Powered by 3 massive Packard engines, PT boats could reach 40-45 knots, faster than almost anything else on the water. They carried torpedoes, heavy machine guns, cannons, and depth charges. Their mission was simple: strike hard, strike fast, and disappear. They were never meant to fight fair. PT boats didn't need admirals or seasoned captains. They needed reckless courage. Most PT boat crews were incredibly young. Many were barely in their early 20s. These men lived, fought, and died together in cramped, noisy, oil-soaked conditions. There was no comfort, no safety, just adrenaline and trust. Unlike large warships, PT boats had no backup. If they were hit, they were done. There were no armored decks, no medical bays, no escape routes. Yet morale was high. Why? Because PT boat crews had something rare in war: freedom. They operated independently. They hunted at night. They made their own decisions. And they knew that one successful attack could change the course of an entire battle. The Pacific War was not fought like the Atlantic. There were no long convoys or predictable shipping lanes. Instead, the war spread across thousands of islands, narrow straits, and jungle-covered coastlines. This environment was perfect for PT boats. Japanese supply lines depended on nighttime. Transport missions known as the Tokyo Express. Destroyers and fast ships rushed, troops and supplies under cover of darkness. They believed night belonged to them. They were wrong. PT boats used darkness as a weapon. With minimal radar signatures and silent approaches, they waited near choke points, hiding behind islands and reefs. When Japanese ships appeared, PT boats charged in at full speed, firing torpedoes from dangerously close range. Explosions followed, ships burned, and then silence. By the time Japanese gunners reacted, the attackers were gone. From a strategic perspective, PT boats should not have mattered. They sank fewer ships than submarines or aircraft. They didn't win major naval battles. But war is not just about numbers. It is about fear. Japanese sailors never knew when a PT boat might appear. Radar often failed to detect them. Spotters couldn't see them. And firing at them was nearly impossible due to their speed. The psychological effect was devastating. Crews became nervous. Convoys slowed down. Escorts diverted attention away from air threats. Entire supply routes were disrupted not by massive fleets, but by a handful of small boats. That is why Japanese reports described them as Akuma no Fune, devil boats. No story about PT boats is complete without mentioning PT-109. In August 1943, during operations near the Solomon Islands, PT-109 was patrolling at night when disaster struck. A Japanese destroyer, moving at high speed, slammed into the small boat, cutting it in half. The PT boat exploded. 2 crewmen were killed instantly. The rest were thrown into the sea. Their commanding officer was a young lieutenant named John F. Kennedy. Despite being injured, Kennedy rallied his men, swimming hours through shark-infested waters while towing a wounded sailor with his teeth, gripping a life jacket strap. Against all odds, the crew survived. This incident didn't just create a war hero. It symbolized everything PT boats represented: courage, sacrifice, and impossible survival. PT boats did not fight like traditional ships. They used ambush tactics. They attacked from unexpected angles. They coordinated in wolf-pack-style formations. One boat would draw fire while others slipped in from the sides. Sometimes they even fired torpedoes blindly, trusting instinct more than instruments. They also adapted constantly. When torpedoes proved unreliable early in the war, PT crews added heavier guns. Some boats mounted 37mm cannons salvaged from crashed aircraft. Others carried rocket launchers. They became floating experiments of destruction. PT boats suffered heavy losses. Many were destroyed by aircraft shore batteries or simply by bad weather. The sea itself was often their deadliest enemy. But they were never useless. Every Japanese ship forced to change course. Every supply run delayed. Every escort distracted. That was a victory. PT boats bought time. Time for airfields. Time for the Allied advance across the Pacific. When World War II ended, PT boats faded from headlines. Aircraft carriers and atomic bombs became the symbols of victory. But sailors remembered. Veterans remembered nights filled with engine noise and tracer fire. They remembered fear mixed with freedom. They remembered how something small could challenge something mighty. The devil boats were never supposed to change history. But they did. By 1943, the Pacific War had turned into a race against time. Japan was desperately trying to reinforce its island garrisons, while the United States was pushing forward with island-hopping campaigns. Every night, Japanese ships attempted to move troops, food, ammunition, and fuel across narrow sea routes. And every night, PT boats waited. Speed was their greatest advantage. PT boats didn't chase enemies the way destroyers did. They intercepted, predicting routes and striking at choke points. When contact was made, there was no hesitation. Engines roared to full power. Water exploded behind them, and within seconds, the boats were inside torpedo range. At such close distances, a single mistake meant death. But hesitation meant failure. PT crews lived by one rule: attack first or don't come back. The Solomon Islands became the most dangerous hunting ground for PT boats. Narrow channels, hidden reefs, and constant enemy movement turned the region into a deadly maze. Here, PT boats faced Japanese destroyers, ships far larger, heavily armed and designed specifically for night combat. On paper, PT boats had no chance. But war doesn't follow paper logic. PT boats used islands as shields, hugging coastlines so tightly that enemy guns couldn't depress low enough to hit them. They attacked from multiple directions, forcing Japanese crews to split their fire. Confusion spread fast. Tracer rounds lit up the night sky. Searchlights swept across black water. Torpedoes ran silently beneath the waves. Sometimes they hit. Sometimes they missed. But every attack forced the Japanese to react. And reaction slowed them down. Victory came at a terrible price. PT boats were fragile. Wooden hulls shattered easily. Fires spread fast. Fuel tanks exploded. Many crews never even had time to send distress signals. Japanese aircraft hunted PT bases relentlessly. Shore batteries turned coastlines into death traps, and rough seas flipped boats without warning. Entire crews were lost without witnesses. Yet the missions continued. Why? Because PT boats were doing something invaluable. They were bleeding the enemy slowly, forcing Japan to fight on every mile of ocean. Early in the war, PT boat torpedoes were unreliable. Many ran too deep. Others detonated prematurely or not at all. Crews watched perfect attack runs end in failure. So they adapted. They added heavier guns to compensate. Twin 50 caliber. Machine guns became standard. 20mm and 40mm cannons followed. Some PT boats carried more firepower than ships twice their size. They became close-range brawlers. Instead of relying only on torpedoes, PT boats started shredding enemy barges, landing craft, and small transports, slowly strangling Japan's ability to move supplies. What they couldn't sink, they crippled. Unlike major naval battles, PT boat warfare rarely made headlines. There were no grand victories, no surrender ceremonies at sea. Just night after night of silent patrols. The men aboard PT boats lived in constant tension. Sleep came in fragments. Engines never truly cooled. Every shadow could be an enemy ship. Every flash on the horizon could be death. But there was also pride. They knew their role. They knew they were fighting where others couldn't, in waters too shallow, too dangerous, and too unpredictable for large ships. They were the shadow fighters of the Pacific. The Imperial Japanese Navy did not ignore the threat. They developed counter-tactics. Convoys became more heavily escorted. Air patrols increased. Shore defenses were reinforced. Radar technology improved. But PT boats still found ways through. Sometimes they attacked anyway, knowing full well they wouldn't all return. The devil boats were not invincible, but they were relentless. Strategically, PT boats forced Japan to waste resources. Destroyers meant for fleet battles were pulled into escort duty. Aircraft were diverted from offensive missions. Supply schedules became unpredictable. Every delay weakened island defenses. Every weakened island made Allied landings easier. PT boats didn't win the Pacific War alone, but they made sure Japan lost it faster. When the war ended, PT boat crews returned home quietly. There were no massive parades for them. Many boats were scrapped, their bases abandoned. But the men carried the war with them. Some became leaders. Some struggled in silence. Some, like John F. Kennedy, carried their experiences into history in unexpected ways. They never forgot the nights. They never forgot the fear. And they never forgot the feeling of speed cutting through darkness. By late 1944 and early 1945, the tide of the Pacific War had completely turned. The United States and its allies were closing in on Japan from all directions. Massive fleet engagements dominated headlines. But in the shadows, PT boats were still fighting. Their mission had changed. No longer focused on sinking major warships, PT boats now hunted barges, evacuation craft, and supply runners. Japan's once mighty navy was starved of fuel and forced into desperation. Small wooden boats, fishing vessels, and makeshift transports became lifelines for isolated garrisons. PT boats cut those lifelines one by one. In shallow coastal waters where destroyers couldn't operate, PT boats ruled. They destroyed supply routes, intercepted troop movements, and eliminated escape paths. The war had become a brutal battle of survival, and PT boats were everywhere. As Japan's situation worsened, resistance became more dangerous. Suicide tactics emerged. Explosive-laden boats attempted to ram Allied ships. Shore batteries fired without concern for survival. PT boat crews now faced enemies who had nothing left to lose. Night battles grew more violent. Engagements happened at point-blank range. Sometimes crews could see the faces of their enemies, illuminated by muzzle flashes. There was no glory left in these fights, only necessity. By 1945, exhaustion haunted PT boat crews. Many had been fighting continuously for years. Sleep deprivation, tropical diseases, and constant combat wore them down. The boats themselves were breaking apart. Engines failed, hulls cracked. Replacement parts were scarce. Crews repaired vessels with scrap metal, wire, and sheer determination. Still, they went out, because stopping meant giving the enemy even one more chance. When Japan finally surrendered in August 1945, the guns went silent almost overnight. PT boats returned to their bases for the last time. There were no final battles, no dramatic endings, just quiet. The devil boats that once haunted the Pacific were suddenly unnecessary. Many were abandoned. Others were burned, dismantled, or left to rot in tropical harbors. Their war was over. PT boats didn't fit the post-war narrative. They were small. They didn't deliver decisive blows. They didn't symbolize overwhelming power. History preferred aircraft carriers and atomic bombs, but historians knew better. They understood that PT boats represented something different: adaptation, innovation, and human courage under impossible odds. They were proof that even in an industrial war, individuals still mattered. Today's navies study PT boat warfare closely. Modern fast attack craft, littoral combat ships, and swarm tactics all trace their roots back to these wooden boats. The idea that speed, stealth, and surprise can overpower size remains central to naval strategy. In a way, the devil boats never disappeared. They evolved. The devil boats were not terrifying because of their weapons. They were terrifying because of the men who crewed them. Men who attacked larger ships knowing they could die in seconds. Men who fought in darkness without recognition. Men who believed that doing something small could change something big. That belief changed the Pacific War. The devil boats were never meant to be legends. They were not built to dominate oceans or win grand naval battles. They were designed as tools, cheap, fast, and expendable. And yet history transformed them into something far greater. What made the Devil boats terrifying was not their size. It was their intent. Every PT boat carried men who knew the odds. They knew their wooden hulls could not survive a direct hit. They knew that a single shell, a single bomb, or even a sudden storm could erase them. When the war ended, the ocean grew quiet again. The engines stopped, the guns fell silent, and the small wooden boats that once ruled the night slowly disappeared from history. Many were scrapped. Some were abandoned. Most were forgotten.